Hi, it's Dave Dickinson with Bankers Compliance Consulting, and I want to talk with you about Reg CC, or the Expedited Funds Availability Act. The key to this regulation is delaying deposits that your customers make into their checking accounts. So first off, I hope that you have this quick reference guide. On one side, the page one, it will show you 3 tiers that say our policy, case-by-case delays, and then extended delays. And on the other side is a deposit delay form. We're going to talk through that, but grab a pen and write down a couple things. First off, this regulation only applies to checking accounts. Now, you might have club accounts and nows and super nows and different names like that, but there's a regulation that defines what is a checking or demand account versus savings versus time accounts. Those are the 3 buckets. And this regulation, Reg CC, only applies to that demand or transactional account bucket. So if there's any confusion about what accounts at your institution this applies to, be sure to talk to your supervisor and they can probably identify those for you. It does not apply to money market, savings accounts, time accounts, etc. Now, the other thing is there are some states that have a duplicate law that applies to savings and money markets. So again, check with your supervisor to find out what's that, does that apply to us or not? Number 2, it only applies to deposited checks into those accounts. So there's a couple ways to get around this. Number 1, for instance, if somebody came to you with a check that you said, I'm not so sure this is good, you could say, let's place that for collection. Now that costs a little money. Some institutions will charge the customer for that. Some might eat that fee, but you don't have to take a check for deposit. Now there's an exception, I'll come to it in a minute, but you could say, we're not going to accept this as a deposit. Instead, we're going to place it for collection. Speaking of what checks you have to take, it's only on us checks that are properly endorsed that have sufficient funds. So let's say that I come into your bank and I have a check from another customer of your institution. John Doe gave me a check and I take that check and I bring it into you. Because John Doe also banks with you, it's on us, if you will. You have to see if it's properly endorsed. In other words, did I correctly endorse the check? And is there sufficient funds in John's account? You could look that up because John is a customer of yours. If so, then that is a check that you must accept for deposit. If I brought you a check from XYZ Bank, you could say, go deposit that, or not deposit, but go cash that at XYZ Bank. We're not going to let you deposit that here. Now, it's pretty not customer friendly, obviously, right? But I just want to let you know about your rights. All right. If you accept a deposit, then this regulation gives you the right to delay the availability of the funds. So let's look at this chart. There's this quick reference here that you have in front of you. And the first here at the top says our policy. So grab your bank's expedited funds availability policy. What does it say? Does it say that we make funds available immediately, or the same day, or next day? If it does, that's actually faster than what the regulation requires. That's great that you do that. Not everybody does. The next tier down is what we call case-by-case holds. That's actually what the regulation requires. And if you were to have faster than what the regulation requires, then in a sense, if you ever fall back to that second tier, what the reg does require, you're actually imposing a delay from your normal course of business. So let's just say that your institution does choose to have immediate same day or next day availability. That second tier down, case-by-case delays, is something that you can impose on certain checks. Now, if you'll notice the cash, you can't hold cash. You got to make that available by tomorrow. Electronic deposits, on us checks, and government checks, cashier's checks, things like that. Those things cannot be delayed. They have to be available by the next business day. If you look down below that, you'll see personal checks. That's where John Doe gives me a check and I bring that in. You can hold that for 2 business days. Now, it has to be available on the second business day. Notice on the right-hand side, no reason necessary. You can just say, I don't like your tie. I don't know, whatever reason, you just don't feel good about that check. You don't have to tell them why, but you have to give them $225 of that check. Well, that's kind of weird. You might say, where'd that come from? It has grown over time with the Consumer Price Index, and it's going to go up every 5 years. But July 1st of 2020, that goes from 200 to 225. So I'm going to talk about the new July 1st, 2020 rules with you. I have to give them, can't touch the first 225. Then after that, though, I could delay for 2 business days anything I want for any reason that I want. Now, that's a lot of paperwork and a lot of hassle, a lot of work for just 2 days. Let's go down to the next tier, the exception holds. This is where you'll typically are going to impose delays for these reasons. Notice again, cash, electronic deposits, can't really touch them next business day. It says I can't delay them on the far right. But the on us checks, even a check that is on us, we can look it up. We know that it's good or second business day. So we could take advantage of that. Then the US Treasury checks. And so you got to watch like IRS refund checks, a lot of fraud there. The Federal Reserve, the state cashier's checks, all those can be held for 7 business days as well as personal checks. 7 business days is when the money has to be available if you have one of those reasons on the far right. And we're going to go through those in greater detail. But look at the little notes there. 225, not required. You can hold it all. Now, there's always an if and and but to everything, right? There is an exception to that. I'll come to that in a little bit. But I have to tell them why. I have to give them the reasons. Now, before we leave this, I want you to drop down the very bottom. There's some cautions. Read through this. First off, it says, if you're using pre-printed delay notice, like the second page of the handout that I've given you for this training, make sure you're filling in all the blanks and check all the boxes. Don't leave stuff out. Those are necessary. Number 2, if you're doubting the collectability, and that's one of those reasons, right? It's the fourth one. That's you have to have the existence of facts to cause a well-grounded belief in the mind of a reasonable person. I just hate that. What's that mean, right? And you might argue that I'm not reasonable, your examiners aren't, your auditors aren't reasonable, but we'll give you some examples on that form in just a little bit. Make sure that you have a legitimate reason and that you're documenting it. Again, there's always one exception. We'll come to that in a minute. The third one, if you're using the large deposit, the first reason listed there in that exception delay tier, then that means only the amount greater than 5,525, only the amount greater than that can you hold for that reason. Now, remember I told you the 225 was the rule, and anything above that you could hold. If that's the only reason you have, just because it's large. You can't touch the first 5,525, but everything above that you could hold for 7 days. Number 4, make sure that you're always copying the documentation to prove or image, or that you have it to support your delays. Maybe a year or 2 later, the auditors, examiners are looking through this and they see things and they're saying, hey, we don't see this. Make sure that you have it. And then right below that, the funds that you're delaying have to be available on the 7th business day or the 2nd business day for case by case and the on-us checks. Not hold them through, but available. You release it on that day. Okay, that's a systems issue that you want to make sure that you're following very carefully. And I give you a mathematical example of that. Let's go to the next page, the last page in your handout. Here's a sample notice that we created years ago. The top left-hand corner, it says, is this a checking or savings account? Now you might say, Dave, you told me this rate doesn't apply to savings and money market. Why would you even do that? Maybe your institution wants to give these out for customer service reasons. If you're going to delay a deposit into a savings account, you probably still want to tell the customer so that they're not thinking, gosh, I made the deposit, I can go out and spend the money. If you're going to delay it, I think it's good customer service to tell them. But you're also telling your auditors and examiners, hey, back off. This is exempt from the reg. And then you'd fill in who your institution is, who the customer is, the date, the account number, the date of deposit, and then you get into the details. We're delaying X amount from the deposit that you made. They will be available on, it's either 2nd or 7th business day. Now, you don't need to say what day that is. The model form in the regs just says 7th business day, good enough. 2nd business day, good enough. Then I provide you with a little bit of reminder. Don't forget, if you're doing a case-by-case hold, that's 225 that you have to give them. So don't forget that part. Now, look down below that and you'll see all these reasons, and the ones that are not indented, that's the 5 that we just talked about on the previous page. It says that a check you previously deposited was returned unpaid. So Listen, if that check wasn't good, it's likely it won't be a good when it's redeposited. You've overdrawn your account repeatedly. You have a problem managing your account, and we want to make sure that we're not going to get stuck with these. So you can look back, and there's some real technical definitions about what that means that your compliance officer or probably a supervisor can explain to you. But you got to look back 6 months and decide if they cross over a certain threshold. Your check to deposit exceeds 5525. That's the large deposit hold. Remember, maybe write a little note here. We can only hold the amount in excess of that. Now, footnote or side note here. You can do a case by case and an exception hold together. So you could go after the first 5525 by saying, we're going to do a case by case hold on that. Don't have to have a reason. Got to give them $225. Then 5,300 would be available on the second business day. Then the remaining amount, maybe they made a deposit of 10,000, let's say. So the other 4,475 would be available on the seventh business day. You could combine those like that. If you got an emergency condition, I'm going to tell you probably the last thing you're thinking about is Reg CC holds. You got a fire, or tornado, or wherever, hurricanes, floods. This reg allows you to delay availability. I just want to go, duh, right? Now, the fifth one. We believe a check you deposit will not be paid for the following reasons. This is the reasonable cause hold, and there's a whole bunch of examples they give us. Things like, we received notice the check is being returned unpaid. That'd be a good sign that you should delay that. We have confidential information. Pick up your pens. That's good enough for the customer, but that's not sufficient for the auditors. This reg says that you have to document what that confidential reason is. You don't have to tell the customer, but you got to tell us, if you will. So make sure that you say what that is. Now look at the next one down. The check is drawn on an account with repeated overdrafts. Imagine John Doe is a customer of yours. John has always overdrawn his account. Oops, let me go back. And he gives me a check. I bring that in, it's on us. And I say, here, I want to deposit this. Now, you could tell me, hey, Dave, that check is drawn on an account with repeated overdrafts. In other words, John is always overdrawn his account. You just told me that. Most banks don't want to do that. Instead, they'll say, we have confidential information. And then they'll just circle the next line and say, this is it on your copy, but you wouldn't tell me. Now look at the next 3 or 4 here. We're unable to verify the endorsement. Some information is inconsistent, or like they wrote out, something different than what is in the numbers. It doesn't match up. There's erasures or alterations. Routing numbers not current. Listen, I would refuse those. I wouldn't even take those. Why would you take it and say, oh, we're still going to honor this in 7 days? Instead, I would refuse those checks. Tell them to go back and get it done again if there's erasures or alterations, or maybe you can place it for collection. Post-dated, stale dated. Stale means that it's more than 6 months old. Grandma gave me a birthday present by giving me a check. I held onto it for 10 months or a year. I'm finally bringing it in. You can delay funds for that reason. Post-dated means it's dated tomorrow, next week, whatever. And technically, this is a negotiable contract. A check is. You really shouldn't even take those, because that date was set on there for a specific reason. And the person that wrote the check is saying, not now, don't pay this, pay it later. So we really shouldn't even be delaying those. So there's a lot of these that I would say I wouldn't take. I would just completely refuse. But again, talk to your supervisor that. We've been noticed loss or damage. Information the paying bank indicates a check may not be paid. That second to last one. You call up that other bank and you say, is this check any good? And they go, no, that will not clear. That would be a reasonable cause to doubt the collectability of a check, right? So if you can get that information, excellent. Now there's an other. Be very careful. You don't want to create stuff, and the examiners, anytime they see anything in the other line, they're going to question it. So make sure that the existence of facts to cause a well-grounded belief in the mind of a reasonable person. Remember, that was the wording on the bottom of my 3-tier funds availability quick reference chart for you. So with that, you have reasons. There could be other reasons, but you'll want to make sure you run those by your supervisor. I hope this helps clarify what you can delay, when you can delay, how long you can delay. If you have any questions, give us a call at Bankers Compliance Consulting, or email us consultants@bankerscompliance.com. Love to help you out. Thanks for attending this training.